My name is Paul Rude, and I'm going to introduce you to my way of setting the angle for the platform and the Veri-Grind jig for the Wolverine sharpening system. It's simple and it's easy to make jigs to implement the method, and the approach will work with other systems for grinding wheels as well. I bought the Wolverine, and so that's what inspired my approach, and that's what I'm going to use in this video. Two things I want to clarify before jumping into the video, and this is not about how to shape or sharpen a bowl gouge. There's lots of help for how to do that on the internet. I found the videos and website of Kent Weekly on turnerwoodbowl.com really helpful. Especially how to shape a new bowl gouge profile, which I'll link in the description for this video. Alternatively, if you join a local chapter of the AAW, the American Association of Woodturners, you'll find lots of helpful and friendly advice there as well. Second, please understand that I'm just introducing a new approach. This video is for people who find new approaches interesting and who set angles on grinding systems. It augments a couple of posts I made online on sawmillcreek.org and the AAW forums. I'll link those as well in the description. Here is my grinder with 8-inch CBN wheels. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this scrap piece of wood, which is cut 2 inches wide. The two edges are parallel. And I'm going to place that wood against the wheel so that I get a tangency at one spot with the top edge of that piece of wood. I'm going to clamp it in place so that it isn't going to move around while the wheel is turning. Okay, just double check it there. Make sure it's flat against the top of the wheel. And now here's a protractor set at 60 degrees. I'm going to run one part of it along the bottom edge of that piece of wood and right up to the wheel. And you can see that I'm getting a tangency right where the bottom edge of the wood meets the surface of the grinding wheel. Now I can use that to set the platform angle. I just swing this down, hold the platform up against the bottom edge of the piece of wood. All right, so those are coincident. And now I've got a 60-degree bevel angle for any gouge that I introduce on top of that platform. Okay, so if I push the gouge in and I start grinding, I'm going to get 60 degrees right at the heel. Okay, having done that, let's just look at what happens if I use a piece of wood that is not so wide. This one is 15/16 of an inch wide. I'm going to do the exact same thing, put it up against the wheel so that I've got a tangency with the top edge of the piece of wood. I'll clamp it in place. And now look what's happened, okay? Because this is narrower, the place where the bottom edge meets the surface of the wheel is higher on the wheel. And that's changed. Now my thumb's in the way, so you can't see how the platform is no longer lined up. But basically, there'll be a chance to see it later. Now I'm going to set the protractor to 40 degrees because that's what's going to give us the tangent angle for this narrower piece of wood. Okay, so let me see if I can slide that up. It's a little bit tricky. All right, here it goes. Now, there I've got it. Okay, and there's that tangency, again, at the place where the lower edge meets the surface of the grinding wheel. So there you can just glimpse that the old 60-degree setting for the platform was wrong. I've got to rotate the platform for this new case by just, again, holding it up against the bottom edge of that piece of wood and tightening the platform. And now if I were to take that 60-degree bevel, you can see it's too sharp. It's not going to grind at that rate or at that angle. Here's a 40-degree version. Slide it up. There's 40 degrees right at the heel of that outline of what a giant chisel might look like. Okay, let's say I wanted to do Stuart Batty's 40-40 grind. I'd take my gouge, put it flat on the platform, push it up into the grinding wheel, get 40 degrees on the nose, and then flip it over on the flutes and get my wing outlines for doing the shaping of the 40-40 grind. So every width for the piece of wood or jig is associated with producing a different angle. And in fact, we can work out what the different widths are for some standard angles. Here's a table that I calculated. You might want to take a screenshot of it that gives each of the widths that would produce angles from 15 to 85 degrees in 5-degree increments. The formula for those numbers is actually pretty easy to use. If R is the radius of the grinding wheel and A is the gouge bevel angle that we want, then the width, W, of the jig is given by this. R times 1 minus the cosine of the angle A. Let me show you how to use that formula. I'll use the calculator that Google provides in its search window. First, I'm going to make sure I'm using degrees, and then I create the radius 4 times 1 minus the cosine, click on it there, of, let's do 60 degrees first. And there we get 2, which is the 2 inches that I used for the first piece of wood. On the other hand, if we put in the radius 4 and then 1 minus the cosine of 40 degrees, then we get this number. And if we multiply it by 16, we'll get 16ths, roughly 15 16ths. And that's the width of the second piece of wood I used. Before we go on to the Veri-Grind jig, let me just show you how I actually use this method. I'm going to show you my 55-degree jig. It's the regular piece of wood, except I've put on the top of it a lip. And that's going to help me with the tangency on the surface of the wheel. If you just put it down on top of the wheel, you automatically get your tangency. So then setting the platform is just a matter of putting it down on the platform like that, holding the two together and tightening the platform. Now, I don't actually do that because I'm right-handed. So what I do is I actually hold the jig on the platform, then just rotate it down and tighten. It's very quick. Here, I'll do it a second time. Loosen the platform, put the jig on top of it, rotate down, get my tangency, and tighten the platform. Now I'm good to go. After using the platform to get the tip bevel for the for our gouge, and to grind the flute so that we see where the wings are going to be, we turn to the Veri-Grind jig to grind those wings. And the key setup for doing that is to match the tip bevel we have when we put this Veri-Grind jig in place to grind the wings. A common approach is to put marker on the tip and use a trial and error approach to get the marker removed all the way from the heel to the very tip of the gouge, and then you know you've got the same angle. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the principle that I was using for the platform to the Veri-Grind jig. And I'm basically going to set up the Veri-Grind jig so that it gives the very same geometry as the platform did. And there won't be any need for a trial and error. You can just put it down and go. The basic scheme is going to be to recognize that the Veri-Grind jig establishes where the bottom of the jig is, excuse me, where the bottom of the gouge is. And what we need is to have a parallel surface that's going to be the right distance and give us the tangent to the grinding wheel. And that turns out to be fairly straightforward. And again, then if we're careful and we make that jig correctly, there won't be any need to have a trial and error process to get the bevel on the very tip of the gouge to match the grinding wheel. Here's a diagram to show how this can work. So we're looking at the platform setup with the piece of wood on the platform and the top edge tangent to the surface of the grinding wheel. And here is the Veri-Grind jig with the gouge in it superimposed on that platform. You can see that the gouge is sitting on the platform just as it would, except now it's in the Veri-Grind jig. And there's a brown angle setting jig with a spacer between the gouge and the top piece of wood that gets the same width as the original jig, and the top piece which establishes the tangency. Now let's put the Veri-Grind jig in the V-arm. You can see that we have to raise it up and rotate it a bit, but we get the right geometry, the right bevel angle, because all that matters is the relationship of the jig to the grinding wheel. Note that it also does not matter what the setting on the Veri-Grind jig is, or how far the gouge protrudes or projects from the jig, the Veri-Grind jig. This will work no matter how those two things are set on the Veri-Grind jig. So our challenge is to cut a spacer block that makes up the difference between the thickness of the gouge and the original width of the jig we used for setting the platform. And here's one way to do that on the table saw. After cutting the platform jig to width, leave the fence exactly where it is, and use the gouge itself as a stop block for cutting a piece of wood with your miter gauge. The part that you cut off will be the difference that we're looking for, and you should be able to confirm that you get an exact match. Now glue that spacer to a straight piece of stock and you're good to go. For ease of use, I like to clamp the jig to the gouge. Once you have done that, you can check once again that everything lines up. The width of the platform jig should match the combined width of the gouge and the spacer. Finally, let me show you how I actually use it with the grinder. I put the Veri-Grind jig in the V-arm and set the top piece of wood on the surface of the grinding wheel. And then I move forward until the tip of the gouge touches the grinding wheel. Now all I have to do is take off that jig and I'm ready to start grinding the wings. Now suppose that I don't want to use those settings of the Veri-Grind jig. Suppose I want to move the leg down and I want to move the protrusion, or make the protrusion, the projection of the gouge out of the jig higher. These things will affect what the wings look like when I grind them on the wheel. So I clamp the jig onto the Veri-Grind jig with its current settings, and I put it back in the V-arm, backing up, so that I can put the top piece of wood on the grinding wheel for the tangency, and then slide up until the tip of the gouge touches the grinding wheel. I take off the jig, back to the V-arm, and I'm all set. Being able to get the angle right, no matter what the settings are on the Veri-Grind jig, is helpful, I think. If you were going to try to do Ron Brown's approximation to Stuart Batty's 40-40 grind, then he tells you to use a 3-inch projection of the gouge from the Veri-Grind jig and to move the arm all the way up. On the other hand, if you were going to do an Irish grind with swept back wings, then it would be typical to use a protrusion of, say, around 2 inches and to move the arm down some. These produce different kinds of wings. And so it's good. There's a method, and that's what I am telling you. This method allows you to do whatever you want with the Veri-Grind jig. Before I close, let me just add 2 caveats or warnings. One is that as you get into smaller and smaller angles, say 20% or 20 degrees or 15 degrees, because you're going to grind the flute for shaping the wings, the process becomes more sensitive to the width as you get into smaller angles. So you have to be precise. Small mistakes make bigger differences. And the second thing is that if you want to get the overall bevel angle to be a particular number, particular degrees, then you might want to widen then you will want to widen the jig by somewhere around a 1/16 of an inch. It depends on how thick the gouge is when you measure it at the bevel. Because basically you want to move the angle up from the bottom or the heel of the gouge into the meat of the bevel. You can look at my posts on Sawmill Creek or the AAW forum and see more comments about that. That I think is it. I hope it's helpful. I hope it's interesting, and I hope you try it. If you do, I'd love to hear about it. So leave a comment. And in the meantime, all the best.